organizational learning. I'm just letting everybody in from the waiting room, so that's my way of sort of delaying the introduction here. And it looks like we have almost everybody in. So with that, I'll welcome you to our July webinar, which we then had to postpone, and now it's September. So welcome to our September webinar, and I am thrilled to introduce John Kowalski, President of Safety Performance, who is going to walk us through a discussion on making human performance tools used and useful. And I think it's going to be really interesting because, John, you have a great background in tools themselves, but in helping organizational adoption of those tools and approaches. Am I right?
Yes, you are.
So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's just jump right into it. And I would invite everybody, as you're listening to John, feel free to make this as interactive as you'd like to. Raise your hand if you have a question or a comment, or feel free to chat into the chat box, and I'll bring you in that way. So, John, it's all yours.
Thanks, Gene. It's a pleasure to do this, Gene. I really appreciate it. I called you a month ago to ask you what the community was all about, and next thing you know, you got me on this webinar. You're quite a salesman, I tell you. Anyway, I grew up in New Kensington, Pennsylvania, and I live in Beaver, Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, basically. And I grew up with 6 sisters, by the way, in a 3-bedroom house. So try getting in that bathroom. Dad was a baker, by the way, but Dad always told me not to work as hard as he did, and to go to school. So I went to school, studied the hardest courses, and got a degree in the hardest thing I can get, nuclear engineering. I couldn't even spell nuclear, let alone go there, but I did go, and I graduated in the 70s. Worked 10 years in nuclear safety at a nuclear power station in Shippingport. All that by another 20 years in industrial safety, personnel safety side, and then in human performance. Worked at nuclear sites, was asked to work in fossil stations, coal, gas, hydro stations. It's a mixed bag, and retired really in 2018. I want to thank my mentors, by the way, John Summers, who was the lead of human performance, and Tony Machera, which greatly helped me, and all the others that helped me be who I am today. I'm going to talk about human performance tools, how they can be used and useful. Before I do, I want to make something clear to you that when I transferred from nuclear to fossil, it was a hard sell for the union leaders and union folks in coal and mainly coal. They couldn't understand the word human performance, and they thought of it as being manipulative. So I met with my mentors and my peers. We got together, and they said, "John, you can all agree on safety, can't you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, my degree was in safety. I mean, I got certified in industrial safety, and safety was always a common ground for the unions and the company. So I said, let me just call the human performance tools safety performance tools. So I did that, and it paid dividends, because I was no longer the human performance guy. I was the safety performance guy. And I learned the safety through the respect of the workers, and through the respect of the workers, I got where I am today. And I owe a lot of the unions today for what I'm going to present you. So I'm going to give you an idea of tools today. I'm going to talk about how you can make these tools useful. And I'm going to start out by talking about some principles, safety performance principles and human performance principles, and how they fit together. My colleagues in safety, when I moved from safety to human performance, they kind of ignored me. It was like the safety guy went human performance, and I thought by starting a company called Safety Performance, I could capture a lot of those safety professionals in. I'm still trying to do that, by the way. And the human performance people can't understand me either, because I'm talking about safety performance. But safety performance is really a common ground. I'm going to discuss some basic tools that reduce errors, minimize the risks to hazards. There's the hazards part the safety people always work at, and improving programs and processes. I'll talk about how leaders influence these behaviors, how conversations and recognition are vital to improving and sustaining performance, And I'll give you some proactive success precursors, safety measures that you could consider and that I've used in my past. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or write me a question here. And if you see something you like, I'd like to know. If you see something I can improve, I definitely would like to know. So this stuff was all derived from military. First of all, the World War II, communications in the airlines, in the Air Force, nuclear power plants, who I've worked with for years. I visited many of the 100 nuclear power plants in the United States, the airline industry and medical. A lot of great people have books on this subject. People like Sidney Decker, who I highly recommend as a good read, or James Reason is a good read as well. There are other books out there too that talk about human performance fundamentals. If you look at this picture, you know, what do you see? What do you really see here? Well, they're doing a job. They got 2 forklifts. I don't know if that's kosher, you know. You got 4 guys on top, 1 guy riding the forklift, 2 guys really riding the forklift, right? 1 guy operating the forklift. And there's a guy behind the boxes there, or a woman. And who's that? Is that the supervisor? Is that the safety professional? You know. So you see 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people there to get this job done. The boss wanted the job done. He wanted it done now. And they got it done. They were successful. And the boss was rewarded for production. And he called his crew innovative for getting the job done. But how many rules did they violate? Quite a few, eh? It's safety rules galore here. Fall protection, riding the forklifts like that. You know, so who could have stopped this? And why didn't they stop it? Those are good questions that as safety professionals, a lot of times we don't look at that near miss. When I was a safety professional in the 80s, we just worried about when someone was injured, when someone would get hurt. Here's a case here where it's a precursor to something bad happening. Performance really is behaviors plus results. Getting the right behaviors to get the right results. Too many times we focus on just the results and not the behaviors it took to get the results, like the previous slide with the guys on the forklifts. Every organization is perfectly aligned to get the results it gets. Think about your organization today. The level of safety performance achieved is influenced by everyone in the organization, the collective behaviors of everyone, from the CEO down to the lowest worker. People achieve high levels of safety performance basically based on the encouragement and the reinforcement of those leaders, peers, and subordinates. So how do I influence the performance of others to use safety performance tools? How do leaders do that? Peers and subordinates. My company that I put together, really, this approach I put together, improving safety performance through safety management, really it starts with the organizational values, the CEO. What does the company value? Is safety a priority, or is safety a value? Priorities change, values never do. Leader behaviors, how do they influence people and the organization? Human performance tools and the training for those tools, simple programs, processes, and procedures, then the individual behaviors. When something bad happens, and I was guilty of this too, is going right to the individual behaviors, because DuPont used to say 96% of all accidents are preventable. They're due to the unsafe acts of people. And I was guilty of that too, going after the individuals and not really what was driving the individual to do what he or she did. Sidney Decker would say, when something bad happens, why did it make perfectly good sense for that person to do what he or she did at the time of the event? I'll repeat that. That's a very good start for an investigation. Why did it make perfectly good sense for the individual to do what she or he did at the time of the event? Good question. And the second question should be, if that person would do it, if I took 3 other people with the same qualifications, the same situation, would those 3 people do exactly the same thing that person did? And if the answer is yes, then you've got more of an individual behavior, you got more of an organizational behavior going all the way back to the organization. Good book, Sidney Dekker, if you get time to read it. Here's a case study that I would use when I teach human performance tools. I would normally try to get a case study that applies to the people in training. And you might want to do this too, based on who you're training. But here's a Georgia plant Bowen in 2013, May at 4 o'clock in the morning. They had an explosion, a huge explosion, a sonic boom. It shook the windows of the houses and shook houses for miles. Plant Bowen, Unit 2, and the newspaper said, this is from the Atlanta Journal there, employee errors led to an explosion that rocked the plant. Workers were shutting down the plant for maintenance. No one was seriously injured. 3 people, minor injuries, but major significant damage, millions of dollars. Georgia Power said that employees failed to comply with procedures and didn't follow communication protocols. Right away, looking at the individuals involved. That's the first thing management does, and rightfully so. They start at the individual, and they should work back through the organization. Here's a picture of, you get some idea of the explosion and what it did to the Unit 2, creating millions of dollars. This is the turbine deck. You can see the generator on the left and the wall on the right. Some pieces of this plant were in the employee parking lot. It happened at 4 o'clock in the morning. They're lucky no one was killed. Here's another picture of the turbine deck area. Here's a picture of the control room. Can you imagine being an operator in the control room when this happened at 4 in the morning? The investigation found that it's normal to when you use hydrogen to cool the generator during operation, but outages occur maybe every 18 months or so, and during that time, that 3 shifts normally: shift 1, shift 2, and shift 3. Shift 1 was told to purge a hydrogen with CO2, but this is a seldomly performed task. There's no retraining involved, and they have a pretty complex procedure. So they started using the hydrogen fill process procedure, not the hydrogen purge process procedure. They realized their mistake. Then they followed the correct part of the procedure. Shift 2 comes along. They purge with CO2, which is good, then with air, but then they left 20 pounds on the system. Here comes shift 3 after a long layoff, back from vacation, and nothing in the notes, nothing in the files. Not aware the purge had occurred. They claimed the purity meter was reading 90%. When the operator noticed the pressure of 20 pounds, he did what he thought was the right thing. He added hydrogen to the system, brought it back to 30 pounds. They're not sure what caused the explosion. They thought it was static charge, but OSHA later found it was a normal outlet, used electrical outlet in the area. Human performance issue, there was no clearance requested for purging the operation. Normally, when we clear these turbines, we remove a spool piece and insert blank flanges, so there's no possible way the hydrogen could enter the system. No pre-job briefings were conducted. No turnover briefings conducted. Ineffective procedure use and adherence, not following the correct procedure to start with through all 3 shifts. Ineffective communication. Shift 1 didn't know what shift 2 was doing. Shift 2 didn't know what shift 3 was doing. Shift 3 didn't know what 2 was doing. OSHA came in with 17 violations, serious citations, and fined Georgia Power $119,000. That's nothing compared to the millions of dollars it took to rebuild Unit 2. Interesting case study. You could see from this case study how the human performance tools would have enabled these folks to make better decisions in their work environment. So human performance excellence or safety excellence is really about managing defenses. That's your hazard mitigation controls, plus human performance tools or safety performance tools will lead us to safety excellence. Those mitigation defenses, you need at least one in place to prevent the event, human performance training, human performance tools, which I'll discuss shortly, and leading to excellent human performance. A simple formula. Some principles that you probably heard of before from others, I'll just repeat them quickly here. People make errors. Even the best make mistakes. NASA said the average person makes between 4 to 7 errors an hour. My wife told me I'm above average. She said, you don't make 4 to 7. You make 8 to 14. Who are you kidding, John? So,
I'm in that range.
We make errors. Amen. We're not perfect. So only one person is perfect. It's not here on earth. Okay. But we make errors. We make mistakes. Second principle, error-like situations are predictable. And I'll talk about 4 of those today. Third, errors and risk to hazards can be reduced using safety performance tools or human performance tools. Those tools also can be used to improve the defenses, managing the defenses, the programs and processes. Behaviors are influenced by the organization, by values, programs, processes, the job site they're in, the housekeeping, and what is encouraged and reinforced by the supervisor and management. And finally, events can be eliminated with strong hazard mitigation controls or defenses. In the case of Plant Bowen, using that clearance procedure and would eliminate the hazard. By the way, OSHA found some other problems with Plant Bowen too. They were venting hydrogen gas to the local environment instead of outside the plant itself. And they also found that the hydrogen valves leaked for months and they were never repaired. So there were other pieces of puzzle they found later on. So these are the 4 error traps that me and my partner came up with. You know, when I first started with human performance, there were quite a few under the twin model and other models. My buddy John Summers and I came up with these 4. Time pressure, people taking shortcuts, leading to errors, distractions, people multitasking. It can double your error rate. Assumptions, making assumptions that, hey, this might be right. You know, you can flip a coin, you got 1 in 2 chance of getting it right. Inaccurate risk perception is one that the safety professionals really looked at for years and still look at is risk and is perception of risk management. So time pressure, a get her done mentality, distractions. This guy's got plenty of stuff going on here. A 2-second distraction can double your error rate. This is my bathroom when I woke up in the morning at 5 in the morning. Guess which one I grabbed to brush my teeth? The cortisone. My teeth didn't itch for a whole day. These guys here, you know, inaccurate risk perception, they got the job done, but, you know, they were lucky. So what risk is acceptable? This little guy here, you know, he could put the knife in the neutral and nothing would happen, or he could put it in the hot side and it'd be a shocking experience. We've all done this. I've done this when I was little, you know. Now we put guards, little plastic inserts around them and other things to make sure that people that don't have that knowledge and that experience wouldn't take risks like this. I could think of my grandson when I'm looking at this, how he would do something like this. So these are your basic safety hazards from OSHA, and I'm certified in risk by the ASSP, by the way. People falling from heights, spills, trip hazards, struck by, unguarded machinery, overexertion, ergonomic, and the unseen, the electrical hazards. These are basic safety hazards that we talk about in my class. And it's the exposure to those hazards that increase the potential for injury. We got to respect the risk. Safety improves when the risk is eliminated, reduced, or controlled with safety performance tools and defenses. This is where the hazard part really draws into the tool part and how we can use tools as enablers to identify and control the risk. This came from John Summers again. He talked about how real risk and perceived risk is reduced with time. And during the event, we see the gap between what was perceived and what was real. It's called work practice drift. This is from INPO, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, from the reference manual. On the right side, we see the individuals with their actions. And I've added human performance tools to it, or safety performance tools, and their values. On the left side, we see the organizational goals, policies, and procedures. People often ask me, as some of the union workers said, why is that book so big? Why is that guy hiding behind that big book? Sometimes we have too many rules, programs, and processes, you know. Then the risk controls, the defenses, cultural, engineering, admin, and oversight controls. And the error traps below, the things that happen before the action's taken. My friend John Summers would say you need at least one defense here, one of these defenses, one solid defense. So when the individual errs, and he will err, he or she will err, people make mistakes all the time. You can't totally eliminate people making errors. You have one defense in place so the event doesn't happen. Managing defenses plus human performance tools leads to the excellence in safety and human performance. Here's my adaptation of James Raisin's model, where James Raisin would put on the left-hand side engineering controls, isolation, admin, oversight, and team behaviors, individual behaviors, protective equipment being the last line of defense. These on the going up, you have increasing worker and supervisor participation. Down below, you have increased organizational participation. On the right-hand side, I added the tools, self and peer check, the individual, size of the cheese, Swiss cheese model. Some holes are bigger, some holes are smaller, some have more holes than others. The safety minute, taking the time to really understand situational awareness before you touch the machine. That pre-job brief, taking 10 to 15 minutes or less to gather together, and I'll talk more about that later, understanding the rules and why they're important, and the cultural controls. In the middle, we got stop work, which is a very powerful tool, and effective communication, where everyone uses to prevent the hazard from becoming an event, okay? Stop work is really powerful. I've seen some companies, some manufacturing companies that have a good stop work policy, but they never really encourage the use of stop work. They never really thank John or Jane or Tom or Larry or Sam. Hey, thanks for stopping work. You know, our program needs updated. Our administrative controls need updated. If you wouldn't have stopped work, we could have had something bad happen. Recognize those people that use the human performance tools or safety performance tools to help the organization. In my risk management study, I did for those engineers out there, you know, you got risk management controls on the upper part, human performance tools on the bottom part. And the tools really reduce the risk to maybe 10%. You're looking at, you know, an average skill-based error is you're 99.99% effective, successful. If you add a self-check or a peer check or protective equipment, then you're 99.999% successful, provided you use that tool or that equipment properly. So we're looking at improving by reducing the risk. So I got 6 basic tools here. Some companies I visited had quite a few more. Some had less. These were the 6 I kind of started with, starting with understanding and following the rules, a pre-job briefing, a safety minute, situational awareness before you put your hands on the job, on the machine, and self and peer check, something you should do as an individual. In the middle, we have effective communication, stop when unsure. Some companies and EPRI, the Institute of research organization for power plants found that when you roll out too many tools at one time, they kind of don't get it. Workers kind of don't get it. That happened to me too. I rolled out all these tools at one time, and they just didn't get it. I had a bunch of workers that sat there and their arms crossed and said, "Yeah, we like the training, but we don't really understand when to use this stuff." I started my career with one tool at a time. We focused mainly on the pre-job briefing first. Everything starts with a good pre-job briefing. Once we mastered this tool, then we moved to the others. Okay, but think about mastering one tool at a time. I found one company recently that was very good at pre-job briefing. In fact, they called these pre-job risk assessments. Well, I thought was innovative. They took the word brief out totally. They call it pre-job risk assessments. And I'll show you a copy of that in this presentation. Here's understanding rules. Got to make sure they're followed. OSHA has rules. But we're talking about having positive control of what happens with procedures, like the guys in that Bowen plant having that hydrogen fill procedure, making sure it's followed properly. So I had a problem in nuclear where we had too many procedures sometimes, and workers wouldn't follow them because they weren't well written or they were outdated. It was in nuclear industry. It was very difficult to get procedures changed. Sometimes it took an army of people to go through the process. In fossil, it was a lot better, man. Their procedures were more like checklists, and they could change them like that, and they were changed properly, and they were readable. And I'll show you one in a little bit here, but understand and follow procedures. If you don't know, don't go, basically, I would tell people. Here's the rules. I started with the Code of Federal Regulations in the 80s, and this is my turnover right here on the bottom. This is what the guy gave me, his 3 codes. He said, "This is safety. Here it is." And out of these books, we wrote these little books, on how to work safe. One company, manufacturing company, had standard safety book here, but they didn't update it in 2 or 3 years, and a lot of it was outdated. We convinced the company to do life-saving rules, confined space, rigging, arc flash, fall protection, tagging. Whatever a company it is, you've got certain rules that you've got to follow, because bad things can definitely happen if you don't follow that rule. And any near misses to these rules needs to be investigated as if it did occur. And that doesn't happen all the time in some plants I visited. Here's a company here that when I was in safety, we had the safety book and the human performance book, 2 separate books. This additionally confused the workers. Just add another book for them, So it wasn't right. What I had this company do was they took their handbook. This is a manufacturing operation, and they added section 2, hazard assessment and safety performance tools. So they integrated human performance tools into the safety manual. Not many companies have done that. They should, because it's part of the process, part of the program. These tools are here as enablers to help us be successful and to make the right decisions. Here's an example of a fossil checklist I talked about, where their procedures were more like checklists and simple, and they're pretty well written. In fact, you got to look at your procedures too, and how they're written, and how you train people to write procedures. And there's a lot of good companies out there that can help you write procedures the right way. And this one's pretty well written. We see it begins with the verb insert, place, screw, and sign offs. And you can see the circle slash there, where they would circle the step, conduct the briefing. After they were done, they would slash it. Circle the step, wear proper PPE for the task at hand, perform it, and slash it. So every action, even the caution, circle the caution. No foreign material shall exist in the piping or valve. If foreign material is found, remove immediately, then slash it. This way you don't miss a step in a procedure. This would have been great for the plant Bowen to use when they were venting the hydrogen replacing the hydrogen with CO2. Here's a pre-job briefing. Here's a simple pre-job brief that I put together with my friends. It's so simple. It's but before every task, who's doing what? What are the hazards and risks? Previous performance experience. Did anyone do this before? Great question to ask. What tools we're going to use? By whom and by whom? Who's going to self-check we're on the right equipment? Hazard mitigation. Who's going to peer check? Who's going to make sure we follow the procedure? Hazard mitigation controls, defenses. Do we have clearances, lockout, tagout? And how do we protect ourselves and others in the environment from if something bad happens? Most of all, stop if unsure and seek help. There's a simple checklist that you're welcome to use in your environment. Why checklist?
Hey, John, I have a question.
Yeah.
So with a pre-job brief, how big an impact do organizational culture, the personalities involved, things like action bias, that kind of thing, how big an impact do those seemingly ancillary things have on an effective pre-job briefing?
Huge effect. It all starts at the pre-job briefing. I spent 5 years just mastering the pre-job briefing. You get the whole, I had 1,000 people at this plant, and you get all 1,000 people aligned on what a good pre-job briefing looks for them. And that's a great question. And you got to own it. It's hard because, and I'll get to this later, one size doesn't fit all. Okay. This is a general pre-job briefing checklist. If I'm doing adding a chemical or something to a system, then there are other things I want to focus on as well, specific to that activity. And I'll talk about that in a second. That's a great question, Dean. Thank you. Hold on to that thought, though.
Okay.
Why a checklist? Well, it keeps us focused, provides us the knowledge we need, and so we can consistently do the right and safe way, and it saves time, prevents rework. The checklist development, make sure you get the people involved, like I talked about with Dean. If you're dealing with union operators, get the union operators involved. Keep it simple. Identify higher risk actions. Decide between a redo or a do confirm checklist, and trial run the checklist to the people that have to use it. Here's a checklist from the B-17 bomber in 1934. It was developed for 35. Boeing was to provide 30 of these bombers to the Air Force back then, and on the test run, the plane crashed. The elevator was not lifted. It lost control, and they crashed the plane. Three people eventually were killed. They blamed it on pilot error. Then they found out the pilot was a very experienced gentleman, and they thought this machine was too complicated to fly. Boeing did start providing more of the B-17s, and they put together a checklist. The checklist was put together with the help of the pilots and trialed with the pilots before it's developed. It's kind of like the first checklist to help prevent flying injuries. Here's an airplane checklist today. What I like about the airplane checklist is you can see the before start, after start, before takeoff, after takeoff, approach, landing, after landing, parking, securing aircraft. Dean, like I mentioned, it's not generic. It's specific to those activities that need to be performed properly. Because if you miss one of these critical activities, you could, this demands perfection. And if you miss one, it could lead to a serious injury. That's why after I leave every airplane that landed, I yell in the pilot's cockpit, "Thanks for using your checklist today." they need some positive reinforcement as well, right? Here's the Apollo crew. They call it the fourth crew member, where they had these armbands and the checklist to use to make sure they did the right thing. People make mistakes. Even the best people make mistakes. Some of the caricatures and the way they did things was kind of cool too, to get their attention. Hi, here's a good one. Medical errors. the third leading cause of deaths in the United States. I think the heart was 1, cancer was 2, and medical errors were 3. Using simple checklists, as Atul Gandhi would say in his checklist manifesto. It's a good read for you if you want a good read. It's a checklist manifesto. The hospitals put together a simple checklist: wash your hands, clean the patient's skin with an antiseptic, put sterile drapes around the patient, wear a sterile mask, hat, and gown, and put the dressing over the catheter site. This basically prevented a staph infection. You know, it's simple things like this, but doctors sometimes get really pompous, and they now nurses are really asked to intervene, or technicians are asked to intervene if this doesn't happen. You know, my brother-in-law last month died of a staph infection. He went into the hospital totally healthy, and he left in a coffin because of a staph infection. It still happens, but simple procedures like this can prevent things from happening. Here's the electrical power generation. In the 94 timeframe, they came up with a pre-job checklist. They were the first in the industry, in any industry, to come up with a checklist required for all line operators and people with power plants. They realized supervisors couldn't be there all the time, especially at 2 a.m. when they go out and call. So they said that the employee in charge, the lead worker, must discuss the hazards associated with the job, work procedures involved, special precautions, energy source controls, and protective equipment requirements. My boss back then had a hard time with this in 94. I wanted to make it a card, a checklist right away. And he said, no, OSHA doesn't require you to document these things. I said, well, I didn't know they're done if they're not documented. So he said, oh, we'll just put on a little card that they could put around their badge or whatever. I said, well, how do you know that's done? You know, so I was kind of the devil's advocate and pushed back a little bit on that. And it turned out I was right. If you think of people like Plant Bowen there was nothing documented at all on turnovers or pre-job briefs. Here's my first card. And, you know, we called it ZIP, Zero Incident Performance. I had this guy Zippy made up. It was kind of cool. We had a standard safety card. You know, it had its roots in DuPont, Stop for Safety. And through Dr. Krause and behavioral science technology, we went from unsafe acts to safer at-risk acts, and looking for more introduction, more discussion here on the safety. On the back of the card, when I took over for human performance, we decided to add the briefing card. This is the first briefing card we put together, and it failed miserably. All right. First of all, look at all the things on here. You know, we had 12 people, 12 different departments get together for months to put this card together, you know, and it really turned out to be more of a maintenance card than anything. I had a call from an operator in the control room. He said to me, John, he said, I sit at the operating panel all day operating this plant. How does this card apply to me? I said, well, you know what? You're right. You know, how about helping me come up with something that'll work? So he did. And I'm going to skip Kip. Kip was the next version of that card that failed. We supersized it, made it a little bit bigger again. You know, more is better, right? Not, you know. And
John,
yes.
can I ask you a question before you get to the next slide?
Yeah.
Go back to the previous two.
Yeah. Here.
On zero incident performance, there's two camps that have come up. You know, pro and anti zero harm.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What's your position on the zero incident performance?
Let me think about that one, Bob. That's a good question. I think at the time this was more of a promotion at the time. I'm not sure it was the right thing to do, Bob. You know, at that point, I would say not to do it this way. I'm not a promoter of that. I think we need to focus on the behaviors of people more than the zero incident performance is more looking at results. It's a good question, Bob. Very good question. So we changed it to keep improving performance, by the way. So it matured through the years from ZIP to KIP. So to keep improving performance, but the checklist was still, we had performance tools on the peer-to-peer safety observation card on the left. This is the peer-to-peer card. We added the tools on the left to the card, and we expounded on the briefing card again, which still failed. The control room operator called and said, "Hey, this doesn't work for me." And what he did is he put together a checklist, and every department put together a checklist that was specific to their activities. So we had a maintenance checklist. We had an engineering checklist. They're people too. They make mistakes, engineers. We had a radiation protection checklist. We had the red cards and operator checklist for operators that hang clearances. They have a certain set of behaviors they need to have. There was a card for operations, control room operations, a simple card. But the key here, guys, and everyone, and ladies, people on the phone, is they developed the cards. They owned the checklist. Kowalski didn't own these checklists. The people involved owned the checklist. So when the checklist wasn't being used, I had union operators chase down other union operators and say, "Hey, you forgot to do the pre-job brief. We need to have this pre-job brief." So it was a wake-up call for me in that these, I call them mini job hazards analysis, JSA, JFD safety analysis, where they would put together the actions they needed to do the work. Chemistry was really neat. They came up with a card for adding chemicals, sampling chemicals, sampling systems. They had a card for environmental samples. They had all the activities they had these individual cards for those activities. So we got consistent performance of all those activities. We got thousands of these, by the way, and that's when I knew it started to work. Here's the card that Fossil had, checklist that Fossil had. The only thing difference, this one is simple to use, a lot of room. And on the back, the safety people put a checklist and they put the life-saving rules, highlighted those so they don't forget these are life-saving rules on the back of the card. Here's one I talked about earlier where the company called it a pre-job risk assessment, which I thought was fantastic. It's a simple card, simple checklist. Here's their life-saving rules down here. Working in heights, lockout, tagout, machine guarding, confined space, and suspended loads. Every manufacturing company, every company will have certain life-saving rules. They'll be different. And we need to look at those behaviors that count. Through the years, people developed these cards. We call them nuclear jewelry back then. And these cards would be used to improve situation awareness at the job site. I will submit to you that this is a simple card you could use. Explore the situation, review the rules, and perform a final safety check. What's the worst that could happen? Stop and ensure. So we made it a three-step process, something simple that you could remember without a lot of these words. Sometimes it would take a half hour to go through. If you wanted people to really go through these, it would take time, and you're wasting time because they forget what they got to do. Post-job briefing, the most wasted time is the time at the end of the day where the supervisor says, "Okay, hit the showers early. We're done early, half hour early. Hit the showers early. Go hang out somewhere." Where you could do is ask the question, what worked well today? Anything we can improve? Any lessons learned that we need to capture and pass on to others? There's an opportunity there to get this information to continually improve the process. This is where the tools are used to improve programs and processes. And when we get these post-job briefings and get these improvement opportunities, what do we do with them? do we recognize and encourage the people that came up with these ideas, or do we just file them away? You know, what do you do with this feedback? Feedback's very important. Self and peer, yeah,
Can I ask one more question on that
yeah,
slide?
good.
And I'm not the safety guy. That's why I'm a reliability guy. So I just need
Yeah.
clarity. What's the difference between a post-job brief and an after-action review?
Really, there's no difference, Bob. There's no difference. After action review sounds like something that would happen immediately after you've done a certain action. A post-job briefing would be something for guys assigned a job all day, kind of, you know, like an all shift kind of thing, you know, where you're like purging the generator with hydrogen, with CO2 gas. After you've done that procedure, you would do a post-job on that. Well, how did the job go? You know, anything we can improve. Good question, Bob. Very good question.
Thank you, John.
Very good.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, John, because I like this idea of storytelling, and that's what a post-job brief is, right? It's talking about what went well, what didn't well, collecting those lessons learned.
Yes.
Have you ever seen an organization go from we're not doing this and it's not working effectively to 180 degrees difference where they're doing great post-job briefings and people are readily contributing their observations and their lessons learned for the day?
That's a good question, because, you know, a lot of management isn't looking at this. You know, they're not looking to see if it's done. In fact, you know,
Right.
It's not a requirement. If it's a maybe, you're not going to do it. If it's a nice thing to do, you're not going to do it. You know, so you got to require it. You got to say, where's the post-job briefing? And you know, for some guys, it couldn't do it that day. I said, well, what about the next day? What about the start of the job the next day? What went good yesterday? Anything we can improve from yesterday? Anything we can learn
Good
from?
point.
Asking those questions, it's a pre-job briefing, you know? So I'm kind of looking at, you know, the turnover from one shift to another or one day to another. Having this discussion, what Info found is, when I was working in nuclear, this is one of the most wasted times of the day, was the end of the shift. Workers were told to go hang out, you know, and they weren't held to, you know, hold them accountable and hold yourself accountable for requesting the post-job brief. Accountability is a two-way street. It's requesting those people to perform a post-job brief as a manager or supervisor, and it's the people doing the work to provide the post-job brief. You saw the one in the this is a recent. This was last year they developed this. I helped the company develop this, where they put the post-job briefing right into the briefing card.
There you go.
Right there. And they collect these every day and they look at them. But what do they do with them? What's the quality? So we'd expect this company, in fact, looks at the number, but the quality. And they look at a percentage for quality. You probably can't look at all of them, depending on how busy you are, but you could look at a percentage and say, hey, that's pretty good. You see this one, Joe? See what this guy recommended, you know? So look for those opportunities to recognize and reinforce what the workers are saying, the feedback, I should say. It sounds easy, but it's hard. It's what you pay attention to that gets done.
Yeah.
The last, it's attention, focus, self, and peer check. You know, it's those behaviors, and this is the behaviors that really can be observed. You could see my buddy John up there having his focus on that red danger tag. He'll look at it, he'll pick it up, he'll read it, he'll check that tag with his procedure or checklist. He'll take the action. It takes at least 20 seconds to do a good self-check and 20 seconds for a peer check. We did that this morning, Dean, you and I. I had the wrong microphone on this morning, and Dean said, I can't hear you. I went into the system, and Dean, you're right. I picked the wrong microphone in my system. He peer checked me to remove the mistake. I think about the guy in Hawaii that evacuated the whole state. You remember that? It was in 2018. He issued a ballistic warning for the state of Hawaii. This is not a drill. And hit the wrong button. The whole state for 38 minutes was in chaos. What could have been done to not have that happen? I think about a self-check, a peer check. or maybe a guard over that button with a big red guard that says, you know, make sure you do what you're doing before you touch this button. You know, it's something we did in nuclear. We put guards over buttons so we wouldn't inadvertently hit the wrong button, you know. So I learned to do that in fossil as well, putting guards over buttons. Effective communication, three-way communication, much like a parrot, a repeat back. Dean, I want you to turn charging pump valve 1 alpha. Dean would say, John, I understand you want me to turn charging pump 1 alpha. You want it on or off, right? On or off, clockwise or counterclockwise? Dean would challenge me. I said, Dean, that's a good question. Turn valve charging pump 1 alpha clockwise in the on position. You say, John, I understand you want me to turn charging pump valve 1 alpha in the on position. That's correct. That communication is practiced consistently in nuclear power and in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and even in fast food. I have an example for you. You know, they have a 1% profit margin in McDonald's, Wendy's, Arby's, so they can't afford to make a mistake. They make a mistake, that line to the takeout, it gets long and they don't make money. 1% profit margin. Here's an example of McDonald's. A large coffee with cream. That's it. That's great. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? You get a picture message, you get the lady or the person talking to you, you get the price, and you get to confirm that's correct. You know, if fast food can do it, I used to tell the nuclear operators, definitely we can do it. To improve communications around here. Stop and ensure is a very important tool. If interrupting that task, exposures to hazards, get confusion. When you hear the words probably, I assume, I think, maybe, should, we've always done it this way, I'm 90% certain, maybe it's time to stop and think about what you're going to do before you take that action. You know, check the rules, always default to the rules. What do the rules say? Seek help. Dynamic learning activities and safety. I did a lot of these where I would help people wear harnesses. We give them the harness and put it on, but what do we do for the tools? We developed a piping challenge. I got the idea from a chemical company where we use that procedure I talked about earlier, that fossil procedure, that checklist. We give a team of guys that checklist to go through, and they would build this piping challenge. They'd have an isolation valve here, an isolation valve here. They'd check their clearance, and they would build this piping challenge in this manner. It was a lot of fun. You got to use all the tools. You got to do a pre-job brief. You got to follow procedures, do self-checks, peer checks, questioning attitudes, effective communication. You got to use all the tools, and we would have observers there looking at what went right, what tools did they use, and what can they improve on. It's a good dynamic learning activity for human performance tools. Here's another one I used, the race car challenge. This was fun too. Did it outside. It really wasn't a challenge. It was a matter of using the tools, using these race cars as a procedure, take it from one parking spot to another parking spot, guiding it through this maze. It was a lot of fun. We had vice presidents, low workers participate. We had one of the workers being a supervisor and one of the presidents being a worker, mixed roles, things like that, building teamwork, ownership, and pride. And most of all, using the tools. In the upper part, this was the tunnel of death, I call it, this Jeep up here. And they put robust barriers here because if the Jeep touched the tunnel of death walls, it had to go back to the start. So you can see some of the robust barriers put here by some of the people. So it's a good exercise. So safety has no natural feedback mechanism, unlike production, where you get jobs done. It's a lot like a religion. I pray a lot, but I'm not sure my prayers get answered. They do eventually, but safety has no natural feedback mechanism. So a lot of people, hey, you took a shortcut. You're not supposed to go that way because everyone does it that way. Thanks for wearing your hard hat, your safety glasses, your gloves all day. I really appreciate it. That doesn't happen. So we need to have supervisors and workers look for those opportunities to reinforce safe behaviors. Who are leaders? Board members down to anyone in the organization are leaders. And the key principles that we teach are leading by example, engaging people, communicating effectively, and talking, and most of all, listening. I get this from from some leader training I did. I asked, what's a good coach look like? And they told me he or she walks the talk. They care for people. They ask questions. Most of all, they listen to understand, and they're consistent. My grandma, I bought you, Grandma Hazinski used to tell me, John, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should listen twice as much as you talk. But listen twice as much as you talk. And she was so right. She was so right. A lot of
grandmother's wisdom is usually right on the money.
Oh, you got that right. Listen as much as you talk. I'm still learning to listen.
Hey, and that's a perfect opportunity, John. If I can just interject, I want to pause and I'm going to take a look at the at our group here today to see if anybody has any questions or comments at this point. If you don't mind me, just and what I'd like to do is anybody that has a comment or question, just feel free to unmute yourself or chat into the chat box. And let's just take a quick pause here, see if anybody has any thoughts or anything they want to explore a little more. And John, I know I think going to validate this, that at the end of the session, I'll be able to share your email address with everybody so they can follow up with any questions or copies of slides or anything.
Sure.
Okay. And it looks like nobody has unmuted themselves yet. Looks like a chat in the chat box. So you hang on 1 second. Oh, so here's a question for you. What was the book mentioned at the beginning? The book by Decker. Which book did you reference, John?
Great question. Here it is. Can you see that? Oops. Field Guide to Understanding Human Error.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Sidney Decker was an airline pilot. I met the gentleman. He's a great guy. It's a good read, a very good read. Very good read, Sidney Decker.
Yeah, and one other question that came in was about the slides being available to everybody. And I think, John, I'll put your email address in when we're wrapping up, and people can feel free to reach out to you for a copy of the slides.
Sure, I can PDF them and send them to you.
Okay.
Good question.
All right. Sorry for my interruption, John.
That's okay. Yeah. The other book I mentioned was the Checklist Manifesto. It's a very, very well written book by a medical guy. Very good book. And a new book I just started reading, by the way, just so that you know, is Accountability. Own Up by Jennifer Long. I started reading this book and it's great. It talks about coaching being a matter of seeking clarity between the workers being accountable and the supervisor being accountable and managers being accountable for their jobs, because a lot of managers aren't accountable. I remember there was one vice president. I just what was the red book? Okay, here you go. The Checklist Manifesto. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can.
Gawande.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Tool Gawande.
Perfect.
You got it?
Yep. Thank you.
Very good read, Bob. Very good read.
I have another stupid question
Yes, sir.
From a guy from the outside looking in the bubble.
Yeah.
I'm looking on your background and I'm reflecting on the Reason Swiss cheese model, because I use that as my primary business is investigation.
Yeah.
And I guess over the years, it's a great metaphor to use the Swiss cheese model for the each piece of cheese is a defense mechanism, and the holes represent vulnerabilities of different sizes.
Yes.
But it also gives the impression that failure is linear, when in reality, in safety and in my business, which collide, is that we often have parallel paths to failure through. So there would be lots of lines going through the cheese, and then eventually one or two of them make it all the way through the defenses.
That's correct.
I was just asking you for your opinion on that, about being able to reconcile the appearance of linearity, but that's not really what that concept means.
Yeah, you're spot on there. You're spot on. I believe it's a systematic approach. Like I started in the beginning, it's a matter of that, reaching excellent safety performance requires a systematic approach, looking at everything. And you're right, it's not linear. It's more, what's the word I want to use? Global, or there's a lot of parts of the organization that you don't see in that linear model. It's a good question. I use a linear model just to emphasize, the defenses, the ones that require more worker control and the ones that require more management and supervisor control, from the culture all the way to the individuals. So I just use it for that reason. Using it for root cause would not be bad. I don't know. It'd be different.
So, I mean, I continue to use it because the concepts and the principles are extremely valid.
Yeah.
It's just the reality is, when failure occurs, it's not usually one path. It's multiple things that happen on the same day.
I'm a big promoter of Taproot. I think Taproot's, you promote Taproot. Taproot. Yeah. Taproot, I think, is a good program to use to really get down to. There's other programs too, but I'm most familiar with Taproot.
They're well embedded in the nuclear and the Mark Parity. He comes from the nuclear industry.
The first thing I used to ask for, Bob, when something bad happens, would be a good solid timeline as to how it occurred from the event all the way back, maybe a couple of days, in fact, into how we got where we got. And you can find out a lot of different things with the timeline itself. And from the timeline, you can see all the barriers that may have failed or not failed, using Taproot, for example. It's a good question.
Thank you. I didn't mean to take you over.
No, that's good.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good. Good question, Bob. Very good question. Anyone else? Dean?
No, not yet.
Okay.
So we do have a few people who are who will have to leave for some other commitments soon, John. So
okay. I've got about a few left. I'll try to summarize them pretty quick. Okay.
Perfect. And I'll keep an eye out for additional questions and comments.
Okay. So I had this one company, this manufacturing company outside New England and Fossil, a company that made turbines. They made turbines for gas plants. And the union, there was a solid steelworkers union. In fact, they didn't want to coach. They didn't want nothing to do with coaching. And it threw me for a loop. I said, well, what do you want to do then? Well, I said, well, let's talk safety and listen. So they bought that, so, okay, let's talk safety and listen. So I got a common ground with these guys, and these ladies. So, but let's talk safety and listen. So we train people to talk safety and listen at this company. It takes courage to speak up. You gotta want to do it. Put your ring in the hat. These conversations about build trust and respect. Just having this conversation about safety, being like Jen said in her book, looking at accountability is what can I do to help you, and what can you do to help me? It's easy to talk, but like Grandma said, it's much harder to listen. I used to try the 2-second rule when I listened. Stop for 2 seconds and just listen. It's hard to do sometimes, especially. But when your safe actions go up, when you recognize people for their safe actions, and you see people wanting to improve your programs and processes, and challenges happen with these conversations, your performance goes up. Okay. Here's a picture I took during a plant's outage. And I looked at this and I said, well, they got their hard hats on. One guy got gloves on, and one guy got one glove off and one glove on. And the load suspended. That 4-ton turbine suspended. So I walked over, the safety rep was there, and I walked over to the safety rep and said, what's going on here? So they're inspecting for burrs. I said, is there a better way to do this? Because they're doing the right thing. I mean, they're doing what they were told to do, and they've done it this way for years. So we talked about it, and they ended up doing is using those supports, putting the load down, using those supports, and moving the load within those supports, and still inspecting for burrs, not with your bare hand though. So there's always things that are good and always improvement opportunities. You see something, you got to say something. You know, you might be wrong, but at least you talked about it. You know, this was interesting. Here's you see things out there that we should be done. The load's close to the ground here, and the guy can see over the load. Here, work is done. The guy can't. The load's above him. The guy can't see nothing. You know, so you got to seek clarity, like Jen would say. Coach, seek clarity, recognize, discuss, and agree on a solution. Here's some examples of safety behaviors. What I like about this is it talks about, you did a nice job, but why you did a nice job is because you kept your eyes on the task. You were totally focused. It only takes a second for something to happen. Then pause and listen. 2-second rule. Hey, I saw you keep your hands out of the moving parts, which is great. So you can't get cut or pinched. Then pause and listen. I thought it was good that you kept the tools and material away from the machinery so that nothing rolls in and gets kicked back. Then pause and listen. These conversations don't happen all the time, and they need to happen to reinforce the positive. An improvement opportunity on the right. Hey, I just want to ask you something here. Are those the best gloves for this type of task? What's the standard around here? What's the right way to do things? Pause, listen. Ask those open-ended questions, looking for improvement opportunities, if any. Here's recognizing behaviors. This gentleman was given a toolbox, a Sears toolbox, 2-drawer toolbox. They love this man. He's a mechanic. Came up with an idea that he was told to do a job. He stopped. He said, "Is this the right thing to do at this time?" And it wasn't. And they stopped the job, rescheduled the job, and you recognized him with a toolbox. Imagine this guy with a toolbox going back to the shop with this box, or going home with this box and putting it on a kitchen table. And the family would say, "Hey, how did you get that toolbox?" And it doesn't have to be formal. You don't need to do the picture. You can do it privately if you want. It's not the toolbox, it's the behavior that prevented an event from happening. Paul Rankin's the guy's name. He had a good questioning attitude. Here's an example of a letter a secretary helped me put together from a safety team. A letter like this to Sean Williams for coaching a younger radiation protection tech on doing the right thing. And we would put letters, I'd do this maybe 24 a month, out of 2,000 people, 24 letters. I'd scan the card, put it in the letter, put his name there, why he was recognized, coaching safety and radiation safety work practices, and give it to this letter with him with maybe a Steeler hat or something of minimal value, a coffee cup or something. No money, no money. Okay, something memorable. And what I found was people would take these letters. One guy actually framed it and put it on his workbench. And it was a wake up call for me. I said, whoa, that guy thought so much of that letter, he framed it, put it on his workbench. Then another guy got in trouble doing bad things or whatever. And he said, John, you know that letter you wrote me a couple of years ago? I'd like to have a copy of it. So it's kind of to balance out what he did recently. But things like
John,
this.
that is,
yeah.
I'm going to interject for just 1 second because
Yeah.
Jason has unmuted himself. Jason, do you have a question or comment, or is that just an accidental unmuting? No, it looks like Jason just unmuted himself accidentally. So sorry to interrupt, John.
That's fine. But it doesn't cost a lot of money to do this. It's recognition that's important for doing the right behavior. It's recognition. It's not the reward as much as the recognition. A simple letter of why that behavior was important, and getting recognized in front of your peers as well. Here's a briefing card, a maintenance briefing card. You could see the detail on this card by Russ Chiodo, a mechanic, and you could tell he was into it. He didn't pencil whip this card, and you could see he went through all the yeses and nos and made some good comments below. And what we did then is we had the lead workers brief other workers. So it wasn't a supervisor worker brief. The workers were briefing their peer workers, and the supervisor may be there as a peer check to make sure things got done right. Okay. So the conversation was done by the lead worker, in this case, Russ Chiodo. So we recognized Russ for doing a good pre-job brief, something that never happened before. Here we recognized a storekeeper, and we were allowed to put people's names down. While offloading caustic soda, the second pallet shifted. She stopped work, came to me, discussed the danger and possible spill. We got supervision involved, decided to brace the drums and get banding around to control the hazard, to control it better. The question I would have is, why don't we band them consistently all the time? The program and process is sometimes chemicals come in not properly banded from the manufacturer. That would be a problem as well. But here's a case here where Nancy spoke up. Nancy's a very good person. I know her personally, and speaked up about the hazard. Here's Robbie Smith, put some ice down. Robbie's a securities guard, recognizing the guard for putting ice down on an icy spot, for making that action. So the traditional members, measures, I was part of this, when I first got the job. I think we had like 60 OSHA recordables when I first got the job in the 80s. We were down to 0 recently, and lost time, restricted injury jobs. Mainly these are results, guys. You know that, ladies. These are results, not behaviors. These are results of behaviors. Job site conditions, another result of behaviors. And we focused a lot on the individuals, who did what and why. Leading or I would say success precursors would say improving your incident reporting, your near misses, especially those involving life-saving rules, the clearance program, lockout, tagout, focusing on risk reduction, exposure control, focusing on behaviors and coaching, use of the tools and defenses, and leadership consistently valuing the balance of safety and production. You need to have production, but there needs to be a balance. Without production, you don't get paid, basically. So here's a strategic plan I put together years ago where I had everybody in the organization sign off on this plan. We had a plan every year. We had a plan to improve performance. There was always room for improvement every year. We looked at our gaps and what we would improve. Here's an example, recent example of a company that I work with, wanted to increase their focus on learning from incidents. So their actions were to review the criteria, the depth of the investigation, review, enhance the methods of investigation, improve the standard corrective action process. And there was a culpability model that they're going to pilot as well. to determine the extent of culpability. There's many models out there, if you're aware of that determine the extent of culpability of the individual versus the organization using the Sidney-Decker technique. Proactive safety measures, potential significant injuries or fatality near misses and trend analysis. Define expectations for leadership to improve behaviors. Coach, whatever. Clean up the clutter. This is done by a manufacturing outfit I work with, and holding managers accountable for coaching and observation. What we need to do is move from traditional measures to leading success precursors, I would call them, focusing on those behaviors that need to have happened so we don't get the bad results. And this is difficult at times because you're looking for quality as well as quantity. I would say complacency when you're young, you're a little baby, when you first start a job, you form your habits. Through time, you develop complacency. You've done it before. Then through time, using these tools and these safety conversations help you guard against complacency. So you do the right thing at the right time. Here's a trend I used to keep. I told you in 2001, the briefing program failed miserably. 6,000 briefing cards in 2001 from 2,000 people. In 2009, you could see how they bumped up considerably from 6,000 to 48,000. These are success precursors, I would call. These were the briefing and the peer-to-peer coaching cards. And through recognition and all the stuff I talked about, number went up and the quality went up too. Here's by department. We would trend this by department. So each department would know their contribution to success precursors. You can see all the different departments here that I talked about had their own cards and whatever. Here's maintenance, looked at percent participation by their supervisors, how much time they spent in the field. Another way of looking at it. Recognizing those leaders. Here's a supervisor here, Jim Schweer, recognizes good communication techniques, but he thought three-way communication was 100% of the time. So he coached the importance of three-way communication in his observation. A lot of times these supervisors don't get recognition. They don't get it. They don't get the attention they deserve. They're so busy working between management and workers that they lose touch sometimes. And they're people too, and they need to be known. They need to be told or some feedback on how well they're doing. And the bottom, you can see, Bob, we talked about post-job critiques. Here, the post-job critique wasn't done to the next shift turnover, but the supervisor went back to observe it, and he found that they had a firm understanding of the work performed. Coaching, the more you coach, the more the undesired behaviors go down, basically. Simple approach. Here's my ideas to perfect organization, where you start with a pre-job briefing. You have good defenses. You start with a pre-job briefing. You take a minute for safety, you engage the workers, you talk safety and listen. You understand the rules and you effectively communicate. Participation goes up. And safety is not the lack of injuries. It's the use of safety performance tools and the presence of defenses. A lot of times the alignment is important. More important than what's done is having all three of these folks aligned perfectly on the same page to get the common results. There's a paper I wrote with John Summers that's published in the American Society of Professionals. There's a website below. You can get on my website too to find this paper at safetyperformance.us, or you can call me, drop me a memo, or call me. My buddy John Summers would say, great leaders are successful when they influence others to be successful. So well said. So that's it, Dean. I hope I'm in a time limit here.